Leeds. What is happening? Welcome to Working Hours, an oral history podcast about a place called Leeds, a time called now, and an activity called work. Working Hours wants to record 1,000 loiners over the course of this, the most important decade in the history of the human species, and ask them about what they do all day and hear how they feel about it. My name is Simon, and this is all my fault. My mission here is to try to map out what my city, Leeds, a city that has declared a climate emergency, did during humanity's biggest emergency. On Working Hours, we hear how loiners have, are, and will be coping with our multiple and expanding crises during their day-to-day working hours. Can we turn things around? We'll find out. To tell this story, I need loiners like you, dear listener. I need people in Leeds or people from Leeds to come on this podcast and just tell me what they do all day and let me record how this affects us. Thank you for listening.
What did you want to be when you grew up?
When I was a very young boy and going into my early teens, I wanted to be an RAF pilot. I wanted to fly planes. That was always the vision I had. I just loved the thought of being able to fly.
So was it Top Gun inspired, or was it?
No, it was a long time before Top Gun. So it was just my dad was in the RAF, and so it was
okay.
a case of
I was going to say, as the next one, was it Biggles?
Well, I always read the Biggles books. I read them from cover to cover. I read them 3 or 4 times. So it was a little bit of an old boy inspiration. But the thought of being able to fly and join the RAF, because I did like the thought of going into the forces, but the RAF appealed most.
Yeah. Well, so I don't know what, you wouldn't have done national service, you'd be well beyond national service, wouldn't you?
Just.
Yes. Okay. But yeah, because my dad did national service,
right.
And so most of my peer group, their parents did as well. So it was much more kind of expected because your dad did, so why wouldn't you? And then I watched Gallipoli when I was about 16 and I thought, no, stop that. So what did you end up studying then? Did you go for the RAF career? Were you going for good A-levels and looking for...
I was going for that, yes.
Yeah.
So I tried, I wasn't very academic, that was part of my downfall. So I sat a load of O-levels, as they were then, and when I went for the O-levels, I failed most of them, so I ended up with 3 O-levels. But I then went into sixth form, and I then had some A-levels, which was the next level, and I also took 3 A-levels and 3 O-levels at the same time, so I really crammed a lot in my upper six.
Cut your work out for yourself.
I did. So I finally managed to get 3 O's and 3 A's, so plus the other 3. So I ended up with 6 O-levels and 3 A-levels by the time I'd finished school, which was great. Which wasn't then particularly good for the RAF, but I did go for the job. I went for a job interview at the RAF, went down to the careers and said, I'd like to join. And he said, that's fine, but you look like you've got a lazy left eye. He said, does it look like there's a fault in your eye? So when I went for my eyesight testing, yes I did. I got a faulty eye. So it wasn't the career path that I really wanted. But it probably moves on to the next part of my wanting to be. I wanted to then, I got an opportunity. I was working part-time in Leeds. I was a salesman. And then jobs, what do I do? So I applied for loads and loads of jobs, and I got the job offer of Tesco management trainee. So I thought, well, that's all right. I might apply for that. My part-time job offered me a full-time job in sales. And then I'd applied for Barclays Bank, and they sent me an offer. So I had all these offers on the table, but I also had been for an interview in my upper sixth year, where I was then offered to be a Butlins Redcoat. And I thought, now that's something that I really would have done. But I always had in the back of my mind my dad saying, go for the bank, it's a job for life.
Yeah, but you could have done a couple of years at Butlins before you did
That's
the
what
bank.
hindsight is always a wonderful thing, and that's my only biggest regret in life is that I turned down the job to be a Butlins Redcoat.
I
went
think
to the
there's
bank.
a theme in that. Remember, like, John Major ran away from the circus to join the bank. A friend of mine that I knew when I was working years ago in a casino, and he had done a lot of circus work and stuff. His dad was a bank manager, and he was very kind of like, I don't want to go to banking. I don't want to, like, guess where he is? And he's done very well from it. But yeah, he was very resistant and like wanting to do all these other exciting things. So I think he kind of got to do what you maybe should have done.
I should have done. Yeah, I should have. So my wife always says I'm a failed actor. So that's probably where. So I did join a local theatre group, and we did a few plays at the Leeds Playhouse. So it was a great opportunity that I had. But I joined the bank. So I went into the bank took some exams, but again wasn't very exam oriented. So I got some, failed some. I didn't actually get my full qualifications for the first.
Were you in the retail side? Were you in branch?
In the branch, yeah. So I worked on the counter, but I always wanted something more. I wanted to get out of the bank. It was a bit of a stale employment, really. I just want to do something else. So I was trying to be as creative as I could. And one year I'd been to 3 different branches by the time I got to the 6th year in my career. And I put a notice up in the banking hall saying, "Merry Christmas to all our customers," just being creative. And the bank manager didn't like that. So he dragged me in and said, "I don't like this, don't do things in my branch, you don't do this." So I was trying to be creative, and it just got knocked on the head. So at that time I said, right, in that case, I'm going to leave. So I applied then to be a salesman in one of the bank's other departments. And he found out about it. And he said, "I'm not going to give you a recommendation for this job because you're a grade 3 at the moment, and this job's a grade 5.
No, ideas above your station."
That was it. I said, "You can't. I'm not going to do it." So all right. So I was really angry at that point. A friend of mine had left the bank, and he joined a finance company, which was part of the bank anyway. So I went along for an interview. My assistant manager was very helpful and let me have an hour and a half for lunch to go for this interview. I went on the Friday for the interview. By the Monday morning, they said, "You've got the job." So I joined their finance company, and I earned, it was £3 a month more plus a company car. So that was it. I was made. And I loved that job. It was just a great opportunity to get out, meet loads of different clients, different businesses, and it was business finance. So I was financing anything that moved or didn't move, I just financed it. So I worked in that industry for quite a long time. And I moved to a different finance company. And during that time, when I moved, again, I loved that job, but I financed a load of cars for a company called Allied Dunbar at the time. They were in life assurance. And I financed loads of cars, and one of the salesmen came in and said, "You want to join us?" Oh, I couldn't join that, it's commission only. I want a company car and a fixed salary. I'm happy where I am. No, you need to come and work for us. So anyway, as things happen, he introduced me to his boss and said, and this man could talk hind leg off a donkey, but he could sell, and he was a brilliant salesman, and he got me in. And I joined the finance sector, life and pensions. It was 2 weeks before Black Monday, when the whole stock market collapsed. So it was a bit of a challenging time, but people need life assurance. So it's something that everybody needs, nobody wants.
Especially at that time when
Indeed.
back when the bankers used to throw themselves out the windows and not just get bailed out.
So it was an interesting time, but I joined that and I loved that. It was a great life, and I was earning pots and pots of money. And so I worked in that financial sector for a number of years, and then I just got fed up, and everything then went pear-shaped. So it just went downhill from there, and I left the industry. I lost my house.
Was that like 91 then? Because it was
somewhere
like,
around about there. Yeah.
Black Monday was 87, was it?
It was, yeah.
And then we had another recession in 91.
So I was, because all the interest rates went up. People talk about high interest rates now, but when you've not seen 16 and 17% before, then we're not
Anything's
talking
high compared to zero.
Absolutely. So it's it was an interesting time, but I was unemployed, and at that time I really took it bad. I couldn't get a job. I was writing CVs.
It was rough. And I like the long-term effects of 2008, like are still going, sort of thing. But at the time, I mean, I don't know what it was like for you, but 2007, 2008, it didn't seem to me as bad as like 91, and so like that was bad. Like there was loads of stuff that was closed. There was like there didn't seem to be any work. Loads of people didn't have any money at all. Yeah.
So it was an interesting time. I was unemployed for 2 years at that time. We moved house, we rented, so it was a bit of what I felt was a backward step. But I had 3 kids, and I had to make sure that I kept the wolf from the door.
Yeah.
So I did, and then I saw a job opportunity, and it was for a company I'd never heard of, but everybody actually now uses and don't realise that they use, but it was the British Standards Institution, so the standards industry. And I saw this job advertised. They wanted a northern sales rep, so I applied for this job, and I eventually got the job. So I was then the northern sales rep for the
So they
British
wanted
Standards.
a sales rep for the north. They didn't just want a northern rep, like some representative of like, we've got northern employees.
No,
Look, here he is.
it was somebody to cover the north, and my north was north of the M62 right through to Scotland.
Okay.
So I was
big area.
It was a big area, so I was travelling a lot. So I had somebody in the office making appointments. I was doing between 10 and 15 appointments a week, just anywhere in the north. But again, I loved the job. It was an interesting time. I love meeting people, but I met loads of businesses. But I got into the standards industry, which has then developed into the career that I'm in now. So it's been a useful introduction to the industry. But while I was in the job, I got promoted from the northern sales rep into major accounts. So not only north of the M62, but it was then the world. So I was looking after some major accounts across the world. I travelled the world, which was a fabulous life. And then I was in the office one evening. I was based out of Chiswick. I sat in the office, and my boss came out. He said, "Do you have a second, Phil?" "Yeah, no problem." So I went into his office, and he said, "Look, I've got 2 jobs going." He said, "I've got the head of sales or the head of training. Which one would you like?" And I'd have to say that's probably the best job interview I've ever been in. And I said, "Well, I've been in sales all my life, but I've got an interest in training. Can I have that one?" He said, "Yeah, no problem. Go in the office, introduce yourself, and take over this small business." So I then had a small business unit within the British Standards, running the training and consultancy arm. And it was a great job. I had 26 staff I was responsible for. So
Were you kind of designing the whole program?
I managed the whole of this section. These 26 people were ranged from the people who put the courses together, had a sales team, but also then the people who went out and delivered the training. But the company was losing money. It was literally hand over fist. It lost £130,000 in the month that I took it on. And I was just like, well, we can't carry on in this way. So I looked at the business, I looked at how I could then improve things. So I spent the next 6 months trying to improve the process. I had to get rid of some staff. I had to streamline what we did. And I turned it round from a £2 million business to a £4 million business in 3 years. So it was a success from my point of view. And then I'd been there 8 years, and it came round to the time where they wanted to promote somebody into a different position. They wanted to promote me, but I said, well, I've had enough working in London, living out of a hotel and living out of a suitcase. Is there a chance that I could be made redundant? So I got redundancy. But from that time on, then I set up my own business. So I'm now, and I have been now for the last 20 years, a self-employed consultant helping businesses in standards. And when people say standards, it's like, what are they? but everybody uses standards and you don't realise. So, if you talk about standards like petrol and diesel, you stand there filling your car up, but if it wasn't for standards, your car wouldn't work. So there's all sorts of standards around, and I
Making things
usually
operate.
I usually talk about these standards. I do speak a lot. I'm a professional speaker, so I talk about standards and I talk about how they can help businesses. But so I ask people, have you ever used these standards? And well, yeah, we've used them. Well, if it wasn't for standards, what about BS 1362? No, what's that? That's the 13 amp fuse. If it wasn't for the 13 amp fuse designed to fail, you probably die. So it's just a case of these standards are there and they're there for a reason. But I then always ask people, has anybody ever used BSEN 600? I daren't ask who's used it because that's the condom. But what my job is then, it's about protection. It's about protecting your business, it's about protecting what you do and making sure that you don't go to court. And if you do go to court, that you can stand up and say, we've got standards in place and these standards are protecting our business. So it's really about protection and reducing risk. So that's what I do, is I help businesses reduce risk. So it's an interesting career change, right from the finance industry background into now working for myself. But I'm always being lazy, so I still have to keep doing exams. That's the worst part about it. So it's like,
Maybe you just like exams.
I wish that were true, but sometimes I just think, well, not another exam, but you've got to keep going. So I've just recently had to do a week-long course and an exam at the end of it, and the sweat was pouring off me, thinking, I've got to get these right.
Yeah, I don't want to do another exam. I think I'm hopefully finished with all of that, but you never know, do you? I've sat in places before and said, this is the last time I'm stuffing envelopes. We have machines for this now.
Yeah.
You're listening to Series 5, Episode 23, and to my guest, Phil Heath. This is another in-person interview recorded on the 7th of May 2024. Hello, listener. Phil Heath has been a member and twice Distinguished Toastmaster with Toastmasters International for over 20 years, and is a former member of the Professional Speaking Association for over 10 years. Before Phil became a professional speaker, he was a trainer and sales consultant for several companies. He now coaches organizations and individuals in the art of presentations with a focus on communication. A trainer/business consultant in international standards, Phil has spoken and trained in over 10 countries in the last 10 years and has a background in ISO standards, auditing, and training. Training in Egypt, Turkey, and Ukraine. Every time he left a country, there was a riot, a bombing, or an invasion. Hopefully, this session will be less volatile. A quick thank you to Kapow Coffee and the Calls for the background noise in this episode. Right, let's do this. Episode 133 of Working Hours with Phil Heath. Yes, 133. Did you even notice I got the last one wrong?
So my next two questions are normally, what do you do now? How did you get into it? But we kind of covered that. So how do you work then? Are you just evangelizing for standards and then you go around and people hire you to come in, or you like how does that work? How are you getting paid for that then now? So do you go into somewhere and go, right, these are the things that you need to use, or like what's the process?
Okay, my process is that I do a lot of networking, so I mix with businesses and tell them what I do, or people know what I do, I've been on different frameworks, so the manufacturing grants, for example, where a manufacturing company will get a grant, then I'm one of the 3 consultants that will be put forward to them. I'm on a few different sites where the organisation will put me forward as the preferred consultant. So they always go for 3 quotes, and then I interview the company and see, do I want to work for them? Would they like to work with me? And I usually try and like to visit them and say, this is what I can do for you, this is what you need to do, this is how I can solve that problem. So
would it be on a particular product, or you're looking at the firm on a whole, or is that all case by case?
The standards have a particular niche, so we talk about quality, environment, health and safety, information security, and they've all got specific numbers, and people really get all bamboozled by these numbers. So there's the ISO, anything to do with an international standard, so ISO 9001, ISO 14001, and all these numbers are bandied around. But I try and get rid of all that and say, look, what you need is... So I put forward a project and a project plan to the client to say, right, I can help you achieve these standards so they can get certification. Once they've got certification, then they can go out and get more business. They can reduce their risk in producing their product, producing their service, but also reducing their risk to their employees or to the environment. So the standards help them with their business, and it will help them improve their business. So I'm the facilitator helping them achieve the standard. So as I work with the clients, I then put together a project plan, and I say usually I'll be in there for 10, 15, 20 days, but I try and get myself out of the business because it's their system, not mine, so I'm putting them in place. Well, there we are. No cause for alarm. The standards then will help them with their business, so I'm there trying to facilitate them achieving the standards. So I have a few clients where I've got systems that I work with. I've introduced these systems into the clients, and then they love it because it makes it simple. What I try and do is get rid of bureaucracy and get rid of paperwork, because there's nothing worse than having a system in place that you're just struggling or snowed under with paperwork. So my passion is get rid of the paperwork. You don't need it. You need trained, competent people. And if you've got trained, competent people, then you can run and manage your business more effectively. And it's about understanding that and understanding the process in your business that helps you improve it. So, and it's really just it's a simple process, but people make it complicated, and consultants make it even more complicated because they want to stay in the organisation. So I probably don't do as much as some other consultants. I don't stay in the business for a lifetime. It's about I get out as soon as I can, and I'll leave it with them. But I'm also then on hand if they need me to come back in and help them improve it. I had a client I'd worked with when I first set up some years ago, and I implemented them a 9001 system, the quality system. I put that in place with them, left them alone, and they came back to me last year and said, we'd like to now add the environmental standard onto it. So can we do that? And I went to see them and said, yeah, this is how easy it is to add the 14001, the environmental standard, into your existing system without creating loads of paperwork. So I just tried to keep it simple, and once I showed them how to do it easily, I worked with them for a few projects, and then they're on their own now. They're quite happy. They know I'm in the background if they need me. So it's just a case of trying to I don't rip people off. I probably do more work for them than I get paid for. So I think one of your questions that you sent me was about the minimum wage and how I manage. I probably work below minimum wage, but that's what happens when you're self-employed and you work all hours that's necessary for the client.
Yeah, work more hours for less money.
You do. So if you actually put it out into what's my pound per hour and what's my hourly rate, then it probably is less than minimum wage. But that's what self-employment is. But it does give me a great life because it means I'm flexible. It means I can do and work when I want to. I can go
and how you want to, largely.
Absolutely, yeah. So I can work if I don't want to work midweek. I can do that, and then I know I can do something on Saturday or Sunday if I want to do that. But I can also then go play with the grandkids on a Thursday or a Friday. So that's then gives me a lifestyle. So it's more of a lifestyle choice than I'm going to make a million choice. That's not in the cards.
I mean, if someone offered you like, if you got headhunted again or something, like, could you be tempted by a big salary and another flash company car?
I think everybody's always tempted by these things, but then it's a case of could I actually work for an organisation? Could I? And I've seen quite a few jobs in the press or on LinkedIn where I think, oh, that job is a piece of cake. I'd be able to smash that job, no problem. And then I sit back and I think, do I want to? and that's the reality. And the answer is no. I want to be able to get up when I want. I want to work when I want, and I want to work for what I want to work for. And I only work for holidays. So I work to pay the holidays because I want more holidays. But I wouldn't be able to do 6 holidays a year.
But then would you want to? I mean, if you're doing 60 a year, that sounds like work. It doesn't sound like a holiday.
Well, we just love going away. So it's a case of we can get to different places. We can see different parts of the world. So it's an enjoyment factor. So I just work enough for me to be able to afford to pay for the holidays.
I've talked about the Leeds Business Podcast quite a bit on this already, so I'm going to mention it again. But one of the guests on there was saying how, like, you know, you should really think about your career from how much do you want to earn, kind of like what kind of lifestyle do you want, how much money do you need from that lifestyle, and then find work that's going to give you that money for that lifestyle, kind of thing. I was going somewhere with that. Oh yeah, most people go from what do I want to do? You know, I can be anything. Like, what are my passions? What's really important to me? It's very self-expression now, isn't it? Like, so one of the things I considered talking about on this podcast was kind of like, what did your parents do? And when I've talked to people who are self-employed, like, I've asked before, were the people around you that were self-employed that kind of gave you that idea and that model that it was something for you? Because it seems to be you're either going to be self-employed or you're not, kind of thing. It falls into 2 camps. So yeah, I suppose it sounds to a degree like you've kind of done that, right? Because you've got the experience in industry and so on, and now you've got to a point where you're kind of like, how much money do I need to live? And it's more about the lifestyle and then the work providing for that. That's
fair. Yeah, it's the lifestyle that I want, and I'm able to fund that through 3 days a week working if I need to or if I want to. That's the main thing. My dad was an engineer. He worked 50 hours a week, and he came home with greasy hands and smelly overalls, and but he always said, that's why he said the banking's a job for life. Never work in a job where you have to get your hands dirty. That was his sort of mantra. He says, don't follow me into this industry because it's just not what he'd want to see me do. So he was quite pleased that I did go into the bank. I'm not sure whether he'd have been as pleased if it had been a Butlins Redcoat, and my mum was a secretary for a local firm. She worked in a few places, but she just worked. But really, they worked to bring 3 children up in the time, which was I'm a baby boomer, so it was just after the war. We didn't have a lot of money. We lived in a council house, and but we had good fun. And they managed to support us in that.
As they say, we were poor, but we were happy.
That's for sure. we certainly were. We had a good life, and it was good. So you live to your means, and that's always my dad's motto. When I grew up, I didn't. I lived beyond my means, and then suffered for it in the past. But now I've had that learning experience. It won't happen again. So it's been an interesting life. But I'm not sure I would recommend youngsters of today going self-employed straight away from school or from a university.
I don't think anyone. I think you're best off getting some, because having a job, it provides you with so much knowledge.
Yes.
Like, just how to organise things for a start. I mean, and how it's one thing to learn on a degree course of you can do independent research and you can put something together and formulate your ideas and all of these kind of things that the degree's kind of for and says that you can do. But then there's how a business does it, and how a good business as opposed to a bad business does it. Like a functioning, well-run, good business will do it in a way that's really effective, that you can see how things work and see how they relate. And then other ones, in and you're like, what's going on here? Nothing works. I want to just spend a little bit of time on the kind of protection and risk side. So we know that, so from a standards point of view, from a business or an organisation, having these standards that they advertise, they're saying, like, you're getting this particular level of quality, you know, like as a minimum. You mentioned risk. I don't know if you mentioned it on the recording or when we were talking before, but yeah, just speak a little bit about the risk side of it, and obviously, like an insurer, that's going to affect your price with an insurance company or other financial costs, I guess, as well.
There's some big instances about risk. Fairly recently, you may have seen the Alaskan Airlines where the door blew off. And that's, when it comes down to it, that's a quality issue. So somebody didn't do something, somebody didn't follow a procedure and didn't tighten a nut or a bolt. So they didn't follow their quality procedures, and therefore the risk was that they could have actually killed people. Fortunately, they landed the plane, which was fine. The downside to that, the risk to them is now their reputation. So it's a case of they've now got a problem, with the plane, but also Alaskan Airlines were high profile, so their risk and their reputation has now been diminished. So people will say, will I ever fly with them again? Could I trust them? So quality is about trust. It's about trusting that you've got a good service or a good product and that it's consistently good. So it's all right saying, yeah, I've got a quality system in place, but it's got to be consistent. And that's what the ISO 9001 standard can do for you. But it also then means, because it's an ISO, it's an international, it means it's recognised everywhere else in the world. So it has that element of you reducing the risk that you can trade in other countries. So you're reducing the risk of your product. It's increasing the risk of damage. Reducing the risk of damage to your product going worldwide. Toyota have suffered from quality issues in the past with the Prius when it was launched. But Thames Water have just recently had an environmental incident, so they're polluting the Thames. That's an environmental issue, ISO 14001. So you can link these numbers and the standards to these, but if they've got environmental systems in place, then they would probably minimise that risk and reduce the risk that they would pollute. So these things have they've all got relevance to it.
Yeah, so it brings down. So it brings down your premiums and your costs in terms of like insurance that you have to pay, makes you insurance compliant, and also you've got the, like you say, less risk when you do go into another market of it being highly damaging or whatever, but then a level of protection as well of that you've been maintaining that standard and you've reached that standard.
You've got your reputation to think about, and your business reputation counts for probably more than money, because if you suddenly say, well, we're not keen on your reputation, you've got a bad reputation, and that goes into the marketplace, then suddenly you're losing business. The one that I always point to about is the health and safety standard, because if you have health and safety systems in place and you go to court, something happens, you go to court, and the judge says, well, what systems have you got in place? And you say, well, we haven't got anything, we didn't train anybody. The judge will say, fine, and it's a massive fine. He'll say, yeah, that's fine, and you'll get fined a lot of money. The thing is, if you have systems in place and you show, this is what we've got in place, this is what we trained the employees, this is what we told them and showed them how to do it, and you've got all these systems in place, when it gets to court, the judge says, fine. You'll still get fined, but it won't be as much. So the key thing is you're going to get fined less. But you are still responsible for your employees, your contractors, your customers' safety. And if you don't do and follow those procedures, then you will get fined. And now the policing, the health and safety executive, the environment agency are all policing these now, and the fines are getting larger and larger. And it happened to a friend of mine, and he had an incident. He had a fire at his factory. He lost the whole factory. They had to move to another location, and he was liable because the Environment Agency knocked on his door after the fire, and they said, well, all the runoff from the factory, from the water and the foam that they'd used to dye out the factory, had polluted the river. And on that basis, here's a bill for 230,000.
Yeah.
So he's like, well, that's fine. My insurance will cover it. And the insurance company said, no, director's liability. It's yours, not ours. So the insurance company wouldn't pay out. So despite the fact that we think, oh, I'm covered, you're not. And so therefore, he then had to close the business. He lost a lot of money, lost his reputation. He couldn't now supply these parts to the industry he was in. So his reputation went before him, his business went, he lost it, put all these people out of work, but he still had a bill of 230,000 that he had to pay. So it's a case of that you will reduce risk by having standards in place. He didn't have those in place.
Yeah, I mean, it might just be because you've had some of that experience in the insurance industry, but it is making me think of that kind of like, pay now rather than regret later, because, I was going to ask you about this sort of the costs and the visibility and the kind of cost-benefit analysis of doing it, but I mean, you've just outlined it, but it's like, for a lot of businesses, you're like, that's an expense that I don't want to take on, but then it's like, think of the risk exposure, like, that cost compared to the risk exposure, like, and if you're doing the thing that's risky, you do it for long enough, eventually, that risk is going to happen, it will occur.
It will, yes. And people get complacent with that, but we take on things like house insurance and car insurance, but insurance is something that might happen. And so, but when you talk about life assurance, assurance is something's definitely going to happen. Well, you're going to die, that's a guaranteed, so everybody needs life assurance if you've got a family, for instance. So you need to think about what's the risk. And you don't perceive that when you're younger. Oh, I'm okay, I'm young. But it can happen. Just heard my son yesterday just text me that one of the girls he was at school with, and he's 40, she fell in the bath on Sunday and she's died. It's like young family. So she's 40. It can happen to anybody.
Yeah,
so these risks are there. Now insurance is never going to pay, life assurance is never going to pay for making up for that life, but it will certainly help towards funding things like paying the mortgage off, and so you're reducing the risk of having to pay out a lot or being made homeless at that time. So life assurance is vital. Think about it, but it's all about accepting that risk. Am I prepared to accept that risk?
And the cost, because you have to validate every cost, don't you?
You do.
It's like, okay, but that's a real expense now, and then there's a fictitious expense in the future.
Yes. But I've always been
like, but you've got to take that kind of. But what if the nuclear war doesn't happen, and society is still here tomorrow when you wake up, and that risk is still here, and it's going to happen eventually? Surely you should think about mitigating that risk.
Well, the only people that benefit from insurance are the insurance companies. And they're putting up the premiums by whatever percentage this year. And that's then a risk to society, because more and more people will then question, do I want to insure my car? So they might then take that risk of not insuring the car, which then puts everybody else at risk. And it's a bit of a danger. So the more the insurance premiums creep up, then the more risk it is that people won't insure or assure themselves. It's just all about, the risk is about managing it and mitigating it. So.
Yeah, but I mean, there's a lot in here. Right, what I'm going to do, I'm going to move us on to one of the questions, and like more stuff might come on as we go through this. I'll just have a look at the time. I haven't turned my phone off. Okay, so I'll try and keep us within the window of time as much as possible. I'll just put this on silent, which I forgot to do, which is very unprofessional of me. So I'm going to kick us off with COVID. There's two areas that I'm looking at really here. So one is going into COVID. What was that experience like? Was it, did your work stop? Did it get really, really busy, or did it not really change? And then coming out of COVID, what permanent changes, if any, have you seen from coming out of COVID in terms of your work?
Okay. So going into COVID, I think the first batch of COVID, nobody knew what it was all about. So the world stopped. So I didn't do any work for the first few months, apart from the garden. I mean, the garden looked lovely because May was absolutely fabulous. The April and May, the first COVID, it was red hot. So we all enjoyed ourselves, and then it was a case of, it was more like an extended holiday. But then when I started getting in touch with clients again, the world had changed to the degree of that we were able to go online more. And at that point, most of my clients said, well, could we do a Zoom or a Teams call? So the answer was yes. So we adapted fairly quickly in my industry, so I was able to then do remote audits. So from a point of view of working with clients, I was able to definitely distance myself, but we did a lot of work online. That meant then I was trapped in my cellar for quite a while. That's where my office is, so I'm trapped in the cellar around a 16-inch screen, but it meant I could still get earnings and still get paid through working with clients. And it was quite an interesting time, I'd have to say. So the first part was just everybody learning new techniques. So I did help clients. I showed them how to use Zoom and how to use Teams and how to present themselves and how to do an audit. And we did remote audits by phone. So it was easy enough to do in my industry. I also had a very large client who then decided at this time, because I wasn't able to go into their sites, but they wanted to put in more standards, different standards. So I worked with a number of different project teams to look at the food safety standards. So I worked with some of the kitchen staff and some of the head of the departments. So we put together a Teams meeting on a regular basis and then worked through to try and achieve the standards while we were in lockdown. So it was a case of they could do the groundwork prior to coming out of lockdown, and then when we were out of lockdown, we were then able to go in and visit and verify what they'd put in was what they said they did. So we were able to put in things like the asset management standard, the facilities management standard, so there are all these different standards. So I had so many project teams that actually COVID didn't overly affect me in my industry.
I mean, did it help in a way, having that? You know, you didn't have to go to a site, you didn't have to see everything, you didn't have to make those kind of arrangements where, you know, because it could be organised for the meeting or it could be on the next Zoom meeting, because that would happen fairly frequently, I guess. I bet that was easier diary management as well. And
it was, yeah, apart from when you're doing project teams and trying to get people from different locations into one place to actually be on a...
Yeah, I can imagine that's a nightmare.
Zoom meeting. That was a bit of a challenge, I have to say. But the main thing was that the clients I worked with, I was actually working in prisons, and so these project teams were with the prison staff. So the great thing was they didn't close. They were still open 24/7. But they then very quickly they stopped all contractors coming on site anyway for the first few months. So it meant that we had to think of different ways that we could communicate, and that has carried on, because now more and more clients have said, well, can we do it by Teams? Because it means that there is less travel, there is less cost to them as an organisation, because they're not paying my fees to travel there, to stay overnight. So they're more than willing and more than happy. But there are certain instances where you do need to visit, so they expect that. So probably over a 3-year cycle, you'd probably visit the client once, and then the rest you could do on a Teams call or a Zoom call. So they are flexible, and that's what it has done in my industry. It's made it more flexible, and people have welcomed that change. Now it's an expectation, or can we do it online? Can we do it online? Well, we could, but I still need to see, certainly in the health and safety standard, there are things going off on site that I can't see on a screen.
Yeah, we're not exactly living up to standard if I just okay it through a video.
No.
That's like, in an age of deep fakes and, you know, videos are lies anyway. So
Yes. So it is nice to actually see the whites of their eyes on a regular basis. But we were able to
see how tight the screws actually are.
Yes. But I was able to go out on some sites, so construction sites, and they were very quick to adapt. So I did a number of construction sites where we just kept social distancing. We had masks, we had the gel on every landing, and we kept the distance. In the meeting rooms, we kept our distance. So it was manageable throughout COVID. So COVID didn't really affect me, other than the fact that I had a great garden. That was the best thing.
Okay, so let's do social media first. So what I want to look at here, so we had a bit of a chat beforehand, and you kind of mentioned you don't really do it.
Yeah, I'm not a social media guru.
Well, it'd be interesting to get your reflections on it anyway. So what I want to look at, so I ended up talking about this because it's like, if you start a business now, unless you're doing something that I can't think of an example of, but you're gonna have to think about social media and like having a space, being on there, and then like, you know, so many businesses learned that they can't just survive on just having a Facebook page during the pandemic. It's like, you do need to have an actual website. Like, if you don't have one, why are you a real business? So I want to look at how much time you put into it and if it gives you the returns you want from it. So you can maybe think about this not so much in posting, but like, I guess you do quite a bit of networking on LinkedIn. So maybe that kind of work, like how much time you spend on that, and do you get enough clients back from it and the amount of time that you put in? Do you feel that you know what you're doing, how to get benefit from it? Or do you feel like, oh, that's a thing that I should do that I'm not interested in?
I think that's probably a statement I would echo, as it's a thing that I should do, but I don't put enough effort into it. But I've always been a lazy sausage anyway, so it's a case of I don't use it as I should. And I've got a web presence, I've got LinkedIn presence, I'm on Facebook, but I don't use these platforms as well as
I mean,
or
do
as
you
consistent.
need to? I mean,
I think LinkedIn, in the past, when LinkedIn started, it was more of a business platform. I think more and more people are now treating it more like a Facebook. Facebook to me has been social. I'll share what I'm eating. I'll show you my next meal. And it's like, well,
here's the caravan.
I'm not interested in that sort of thing. And I don't want to advertise the fact that I'm going on holiday and tell everybody that my house is empty for the next 2 weeks. So I don't do that, so I stay away from social media on that basis. I have started to use LinkedIn to some degree, but I really just correspond with the people in my network. But I could do more. You know, the plan is that I could and should do more things like podcasting. I could and should do things more like videos. And I've got a lot of videos on my computer that I should really then put on my website and share on LinkedIn, but I haven't done it through laziness. But not necessarily through laziness, but also not knowing how to. So it's a case of I probably just need that kick up the proverbial bottom to say, this is how you do it.
I mean, do you need, like, from a client acquisition point of view, like, do you need to create more client base and so on? I mean, are you taking over nicely? Are you in a position where you're kind of like, I've got enough work and the amount of work that I want to do? Or is there a need for, like, I've got to keep having more and more clients and expanding the client base? And, like, I get the impression that you work from recommends, word of mouth, and you work for a business for a while, and you kind of spend, I mean, do you have quite a few clients going consecutively, or is it more project-based?
It's a mixture, really. I have a few clients that I've kept for a long period of time, but because I've got a good relationship with them, they know that I go back in there once a year. I see them. I'm working on a couple of projects at the moment with clients where they need new standards coming out. Standards are always changing, so they need help with those. So I'm working on a large project with a client at the moment. So it's just a case of I do get referrals, and I that's where I've based my business around, is getting people recommending me in. But I always try and go to see the client first and say, this is what I can do. And if they don't like me, then they'll say, no, that's how I'd rather work. I'd rather work with somebody who wants to work with me rather than people who I don't feel comfortable with and they don't feel comfortable with me. That's how I work. So I could do with a few more clients, yes. I'm always open to accepting new clients, but I don't go out and promote myself as much or as well as I should on the social media.
Well, and it would be really hard, I think, because the strategy would be difficult because you need to be in specific places, don't you? But then you need to be quite broad, and you'd be just targeted media advertising. It's better off for you, isn't it?
It could be, again, that's then expensive, and it's like, well, so does that expense
But then
justify
when
the
you
needs?
do discuss with clients, if you're making those discussions, and that shows, that shows the social side. That's showing you, like, I'm really glad they put music on, by the way. That's showing you, your social side and how you work with clients and the relationships you've got with clients. That's like a recommendation.
Yeah.
So one of the an interview I did recently, and the guy was saying that, he's had clients come to him, and he's like, because they've, like the lurkers online, the ones that don't engage with your posts and stuff, but they see everything. And he's like, I've had a couple of people who've been like, I've been watching you for ages, and I've gone to 3 to 10 of your other connections and stuff, or people that you worked with, and got their feedback and stuff. So I've done my research on you socially and like by reputation, and you seem, this is why we picked you. So there's always that aspect of like, because you're never party to the discussions that you're not party to.
No, that's true.
So potentially that's the area that you want to focus on. I don't know.
I think LinkedIn still has a value, and I think I should do more in that LinkedIn. Some advice I got some years ago was that there's all these platforms around, because you've now got all the new generation, the TikTok and these type of Facebook. They've come through, but it's a case of, he said to me, focus on one and do it well.
Yeah.
But do it consistently.
Yeah.
And that's what I've not done, is just post consistently or post anything on a regular basis. And I think that's something that my learning experience is I should do more of that, and I could do more of that. And if I did that, then yes, I'd probably get more business. But I'm not in a rush to do it at the moment.
But it's all the boring stuff as well. I suppose that the best post is one that's like, you mention something about your work and your professionalism, you link it to something, but it's really just a post of your garden or the dog, or this is me with my hair a mess in the morning and I'm trying to decide how to comb it. Those kind of things because that's all the stuff that makes us stop, isn't it? It's the social, because all the business stuff is just, it's like all the adverts that we see everywhere. It's just, you block them out, or you try to.
Yeah, I think it's a case of having some form of interesting topic, an interesting thing to put on there. But I'm not sure I'd link it to my hair, that's for sure. But is it relevant? Now, a lot of people then they make up things, and they do a lot of posts, and they put themselves in different positions and different places and meeting different people. But I do find a lot of it is vacuous. It's just like, and then they follow and share these things, and you think, well, why? It doesn't have a relevance to their business or to anybody else's business. Then is that where it shouldn't go? I think it should be still a little bit focus on my personality. And so my personality is that I'm a fun person, I think. The wife would tell you otherwise. I'm an old-fashioned type person, so I like old-fashioned dad jokes. So that's my humour. But the trouble is, when you do that online, sometimes these dad jokes, people don't understand them in the written form. And a lot of it is when you're face-to-face, a dad joke is funny. Online, it doesn't come across like that. So it's like, well, and then you have to explain it all.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and then it's not a joke.
And then it's not a joke. When you have to explain it, it's not. So I do find social media a challenge. I think that's coming back to the question. It's a bit of a challenge for me, but that's me. Would it work for others? It does. And I can see people being very successful and using the platforms successfully.
Well, let's just, before we move off this, let's just have a quick standards discussion on this. Like, I mean, as far as I'm aware, there isn't really any standards for social media. I mean, there's, in terms of regulation, because they're not even regulated in the same way as like other broadcast media and so on. But I suppose it's, the limits are kind of obscenity and, defamation and these kind of things. Could there be and should there be standards within social media of like, I don't even know how you would do it. I mean, like,
well,
how would standards apply to social media?
A standard needs to be monitored and managed, and so therefore there is it's not really a police force, but an authority behind that.
Because there's not even, if you think of like, film censorship or with games, it's like, there's an age range, an age rating of like, this is suitable for these people. There's none of that online.
No. It's
just like, is this suitable for kids? Because there's kids and there's adults and that's it.
Yeah, and the only people that are policing that are the people like
the private companies that own the platform. Yeah,
that own it. There are some behind the scenes where consultants have set up this is what we can do and we can help you manage that and monitor what's going on. So there are things and monitoring things in systems that you can put in place, but there isn't really that overall standard behind that. Now, yes, there should be, but standards should be voluntary, not mandatory. Once you have a mandatory standard, then somebody's got to police it. So it's then, well, who's going to police it and who's going to police the police? So you do have, in the standards industry, we have an overall body in the UK that's recognised worldwide. That's called UCAS, the United Kingdom Accreditation Service, and they're viewing all the certification bodies and all the certifications, and they make sure that people are managing their certificates and their certifications effectively. So there is a police force in the standards industry. British standards are always trying to introduce new standards. Now there's a lot of cyber security standards, the information security standard, there's the data protection standard, so there are standards on the periphery that if you breach them, then you will get fined. Yeah. So and a lot of people don't realise that information security is information, but how are you securing that information? How are you making sure that your phone, your emails are protected? So you get a lot of problems, people phishing, losing money because they're answering links, but there's always somebody there to beat the system and always somebody finding a way around these systems. So it's just a case of there are standards in place, industry standards for cyber protection, cyber security standards, so there are systems and standards in place, but they are managed, but who's policing them? And usually you find out it might be the police that you will have to respond to, and there are a couple of organisations that you would then apply to and say, I've been scammed, and then trying to get your money back is more difficult. So it's a case of that there aren't any specific standards around the social media platforms at the moment. I'm sure there will be, but it would then need the platforms to become party to that, and they would need to say, yeah, we want these to be policed. But more often than not, it's the platforms themselves. When it says that these websites are bad, you then have to ask Facebook to take them down. So you have to ask LinkedIn to take them down. So you're actually asking them to police themselves. So there's no set standard there's somebody else coming in externally that says, right, close that down.
And the way that they're going to do that is with a blanket, indiscriminate algorithm that just goes, all of this gone.
Well, that's what's happened. I had a post on my feed the other day that a friend of mine had put on a post because he'd mentioned one particular word. He was then banned, and he wasn't saying anything derogatory. It was just the particular way that he'd worded this post. He's then banned for a period of time. So it's just the algorithms then read these words, and because they then put a blanket ban on that, you can't say things. So more and more that you'll find that you can't say anything on LinkedIn, and then it becomes self-policing because people won't put on there, well, if I can't say that, I won't bother. I'll find another platform. So they'll then go off elsewhere. but it is.
Or they just replace one word with another word. All you have to do is replace it with a bunch of symbols, and you can say exactly the same thing as you were saying before, and just like, you know, I mean, that's what the press did in the 80s, wasn't it?
Yeah.
All the asterisks and stars. You're still swearing at me.
Yes.
So let's do Brexit.
Yep.
So I'd imagine like this might have actually affected your work, the areas that you work in, because a lot of the time it's either. So the answers that I generally get on this are, it's really bad, I hate it, loads of bad stuff's happened, or I haven't noticed. Doesn't really affect me. So they seem to, and then like a few in the middle, but that seems to be the answer. So like, has it changed anything for you work-wise since we've Brexited? Has it made a difference?
Interesting question. The standards industry, and the British standards in particular, they are responsible for British standards and international standards in this country. So in the UK, and what they have is an international multilateral agreement. So they approached, or we're going through Brexit, they approached the international arena and said, will this affect us? The key thing is, no, because they are international standards. Mm-hmm. So the standards are still valid, and they've then said, because of that, we'll carry on promoting international standards. So the standards are still recognised. And therefore it didn't really affect me. What it did affect me was the travel to other countries. And so that's affected me, but COVID did more of that than Brexit did. Mm-hmm. But I'm still now working, I'm heading across to Ireland in the next week or so in the Republic of Ireland. Mm-hmm. So I'll be in, that's an overseas country now, essentially. So it's now, I'm now trading in euros, but they still need the standards. So I'm then going to look at their certifications, and they want to be recognised not only in the UK, but also they want to be recognised on the international stage as well. So the ISO standards are still relevant. So Brexit didn't really affect the standards industry to that degree. It cut a bit of trade down at the beginning, just because people again weren't sure about where and how they'd get products. So things like in both the paper industry and the wood industry, where are we going to get sustainable wood from? So the FSC standard was affected because it's a case of, well, the cost of that now, importing wood and paper, has been expensive because they've put the prices up. But if we don't buy, we're a major player in the international arena. If we don't buy as a country, as the UK, if we don't buy from these sustainable sources, then they'll lose income. So they'll soon bring their prices down because they'll still want to trade with us. So Brexit didn't really affect cross-border trade, other than the fact that prices have risen. What has affected is more of the wars. And so the thing is that we had the incident, not necessarily a war on there, but the ship gets stuck in the Suez Canal. Mm-hmm. So when that happens, in the Yemen and in the Gulf, where the
around the Red Sea,
around there, the bombing, the now targeting vessels that are bringing in products into the UK. So that's affecting industry because they're not sure as to when and how they're going to get their products, and if they haven't got them, they can't trade. So then it does open the avenues to say, well, if we can't source it from overseas, is there anywhere that we can have in the UK that we can source it? And so now we've become a non-producing nation over the last few years. We seem to have given it all away. Then it just opens the eyes to think, well, actually, we should now start thinking about putting in products, services that we can actually resource in the UK, in and around our local, because that will cut down the environmental costs. We're not transporting it as far, so the industry really needs to wake up and say, yeah, we need to source it locally. And that's what happened in COVID, is that people were then going to shop locally because you couldn't travel. So, and then it was all a big thing around shop local. So we've now got more local butchers, bakers, candlestick makers, whatever it might be. We're now sourcing locally, and people have found the benefit from that. That you don't have to travel and you're getting quality products. So if I can echo one thing that we said earlier, is we need to have more production and more facilities to produce goods in this country, and the quicker we do that, the better. But that will be a long term coming, and is it something that industry wants to do? Are we able to gear up towards being a producing nation?
Is it something industry can do without a government putting in an industrial strategy?
No, I don't.
I mean, that's not for us to answer.
It isn't, but it's a difficult question because it's a case of,
I don't think so. I think, have an industrial strategy. I mean, it's not like the world's moved past industry.
No.
We don't just have, we've got 3D printers, but we haven't got Star Trek replicators where they just,
But we just seem to have given it all away over the last few years as well. So we've reduced the skills of our workforce, but we just need to reskill and upskill and make sure that we can do something here. We need to be producing nation.
Yeah, and then the flip side of that is where we have skilled people, they go abroad because there aren't the opportunities here, and it's difficult to make the opportunities, without funding, support, the investment infrastructure. I'm probably going to get the... I'm going to tell you this anyway, but probably all the details of it are wrong, but it was something like... I was listening to something... I think it was this trader talking about the global economy, and he was saying that I think it's either 30 times or 300 times more US business support compared to Britain. Might be 30, but it could also be 300.
Right.
But it was we don't have the support. It's there's all this kind of start a business thing, but it's where's the support for it? With the knowledge, not just money, knowledge, experience, people. And why is it so hard to hire people?
It's not easy, but the support isn't there because what do the government want to do?
They don't want to do anything, do they?
We're short of money, but that investment is the fact. It's about insurance. It comes back to risk. If we don't invest in the country and in the infrastructure,
and confidence. I mean, the whole thing is having confidence. Again, this was something I listened to recently. Governments around the world gave out a lot of money, and I know there's been the inflation and stuff, but it hasn't all been absorbed at the top. There's still a lot of money out there that people are hanging on to, and it's they haven't got the confidence to spend because everything's up in the air. But it's we need to instill that confidence. Best way to do that: get the government to invest some money. Have them spend. If they're spending, other people will be like, well, that government money's flying around, they're spending, I can spend a bit more.
Yeah, I think we need to look at probably replacing some of the funds that we're giving away to. I mean, we've just funded however many millions into India, and then they've just put an aircraft on the moon. It's well, hang on, we've probably paid for that. So why think about overseas aid when we could do with that money coming in and investing in our infrastructure?
Yeah.
So there are areas where I think...
our space program.
Yeah.
Which we don't really have.
Which we don't. But we are at the forefront of technology. We're at the forefront of most industries because it started here.
But then they leave.
They do.
Because there aren't the opportunities.
Yeah.
So it's it's a place to come and get knowledge and take away.
Yeah.
Like a knowledge shop.
So we're good at that. We need to charge more for it, but then that needs to be reinvested back into.
But that's always been the British problem, hasn't it? The investment. We don't like investing. We like to extract.
We do.
So talking about extraction, let's do climate change.
Oh, climate change.
So I'll just keep this simple. In terms of your work, has it affected anything? Where I think this might go is in terms of potential legislation coming down the pipe. Obviously, there's some environmental legislation that you've mentioned already in terms of standards.
Yeah.
Has it affected anything for you yet that you're aware of? And maybe talk about potentials for it as well?
Yeah, I think personally, with regards to climate change, from my point of view, I think I'm always looking at the electricity bill at home. That's obviously rising, and working from home has then impacted on my heating and electric bill. So climate change then has some effect, because I've got to then think, how can I reduce those bills? But realistically, I need to run a business and I want to work from home, so it's then that choice I make. Within my industry, then people are now waking up. In fact, they've been waking up for a long time about climate change is affecting them. How can we help our business manage that? Well, one of the things that you can do is look at standards. So ISO 14001 was the first environmental standard. It was introduced quite a long time ago. People didn't really recognise it for what it really is. It is a system that, and really a standard that will help you put systems in place to manage how you impact on the environment. And it's fairly basic, but there are there's about 17 or 18 standards within the 14,000 series anyway, so all little bits. But one of the ones that is important is ISO 50001, which is the measurement of 14,001. It's about measuring the impact that we have, so what it's costing us to put these initiatives in place, what it's costing us to waste this, and how can we save money. So the 50,001 is now becoming more important. And then you've got industry starting to say, well, we're going to reduce our carbon. So we've got carbon reduction. We had carbon reduction credits some years ago, but big businesses were then, we're going to reduce our carbon, so we'll offset our carbon. So what did they do? Well, in the first instance, they invested in the UK, but now, because these carbon credits ran out, they now start buying a forest in some remote place in Africa, and now those credits are running out. And you think, well, that's actually a bit stupid, really. We're investing in other countries just to say, I've reduced my carbon credit. I've planted 50 trees for the 100 miles I've just driven up to Scotland, or I'm just flying around the world, I'll buy 50 trees, or whatever it might be. So it's really about figures creating. You can do a lot with statistics, and you can manipulate the statistics. So is it relevant to industry and to carbon commitment? But people are now talking about net zero, and we've got ambitious targets. People are saying we want to go net zero, and then it was like pie in the sky, finger in the air, lick the finger, see which way the wind's blowing. We'll go for net zero by 2030. That's what initially no, said this government, we'll do net zero by 2025. Well, all these are just pie in the sky, because we haven't got the infrastructure, because the government isn't investing in the infrastructure. We haven't got an electric point on every street corner.
Which is pretty much across the board. It's everything, isn't it? It's like the whole, and it's not just here, and it's not just this government. It seems like I get the impression it's like this everywhere. Yeah. That they just do a press release, and it's like, we said a thing about that, therefore it's taken care of. It's like, that is not how anything is done ever. You don't just say, it's not tweeting. You don't just make a comment on it and then that's done. I've put my opinion of that. You're the government. We don't want your opinion. No. We want your policy and your action and your money and you to charge things.
We need actions behind it. But the thing is, the big statement a few years ago was we're going to get rid of petrol and diesel cars by 2030. It's like, well, how?
Well, that's it. Again, for clicks. Yeah. We said this thing for clicks because it will hopefully tick a box with, a bunch of environmentalists and this campaign group, and it will annoy this group over here who will print lots of other things, which will get us more retweets.
But the car and the vehicle industry, in this country is a major supporter of industry and employment, and is bringing revenue in to UK. If we cut that off, where's that going to come from? We're not going to make it in electric. Yeah, we're building a new battery plant, but that's just one. But China's building 20 battery plants. China's building cars, but we're then buying these cars.
Well, I heard Tesla's closing down. It's like, I think there's 2 in Europe, off the back of that. Of what's happened over the Red Sea, closing down its factories in Europe, because they're going to have to go all the way around Africa, which adds 10 days to the whole thing, which means that's not viable anymore. So that all those jobs gone now. because of a change like that. And we're going to see more of these things happening all the time.
But then the
So-
batteries have got a limited life as well, so it's now looking between 8 and 10 years for a battery in your car, and you've got to replace it. And they were saying the other day in the
And
press.
then what do you do with the dead batteries?
Well, we've got a big industry now going to rise up on getting rid of batteries. But you've got the price of the battery, the new batteries, is anywhere between 4 and 15. In fact, if not more, 20,000 pounds for a new battery. Whereas you used to be able to buy a car for that. But now you've got to buy the battery if you want to keep the car.
But the ideal thing for them would be to do it like the iPhone and make it so you can't replace the battery and you have to buy a whole new car.
Yeah. But then we've got this, and now it's destroying the infrastructure because these cars are now heavier, so the roads can't take it. So that's why we've now got all these potholes coming up, because the cars are heavier. So all these electric cars are actually costing money. Oh, but they don't pay tax. So they've had this industry. Well, it's just these blanket statements that they do, like you said. We'll just get rid of these things, but with no plan or policy.
And yeah, no planning and no forward thinking of like, what are the effects of this? It's like as if you can just layer upon layer upon layer, like so easily, and it doesn't affect things.
But Leeds City Council are a prime example of that, because they've just spent however many millions building a cycle lane between Leeds and Bradford, so I can ride on my bike, which I haven't got, all the way across from Leeds to Bradford. Great. How many millions was that? They've cut down the size of the road, so now we've got traffic jams. So we've now got pollution because cars are stranded and standing and they knocked all the trees down as well. But so they've got all these problems, and then you look and see how many cycles actually use that cycle lane. So for the minority, we've invested, but the majority have to suffer for it, and that's exactly what's happened, because there wasn't a clear policy or a strategy in place, and that they just have done that because it's all about, we want to be seen to be green. That's not being seen to be green. That's not helping anybody's carbon commitment or carbon reduction plan. It's just now increased. A friend of mine he's got a business, and they decided that they would invest in electric vehicles. Right, all the directors saw electric vehicles. He came in one day to a meeting. He was crying his eyes out virtually. He said the electricity bill at the business has just now gone through the roof because everybody's bringing the car in to charge them up at work. So all these people who they would have normally charged things at home, he's saying it's now costing me money as a business. So what can he do? Does he charge the employee for charging his car?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, but there's no strategy.
But you made
in
me
place.
buy this car. Well, you would have paid for petrol.
And so there's, again, no strategy in place. And so this is where standards do come in. So we need to have standards, but we need to have plans. And you need to understand the process behind standards. Should we have standards for these? Yes, there will be. And there is standards already for electric vehicles, electric cars, for the batteries. There are standards for production of these, but there's no strategy in place to actually put them in place, no infrastructure in place to put things in place. And who's going to produce the energy?
Because we don't plan, because it's all just like, hey man, do what you want.
Yeah,
If
and we're
it
going
works,
to
cool.
we're going to decommission these 2 nuclear plants that we've got already, and therefore the cheapest form and cleanest form
and
of energy.
the ones that we're building, we're going to sell to somebody else who's not got any experience with it, and he's not going to have any oversight and not care if it goes however shape.
Absolutely. So it's so climate change. How has it affected me? In the business, it hasn't, because standards are international, and climate change is actually probably going to increase my business because people will want standards in place. They want to see how can we help reduce our impact on the environment.
So does do you get quite a lot of work for the environmental standard? Is that something that's grown over time?
It has, and it's growing over time. I was in one particular client, and they've created their net zero plan, and they've got a wonderful plan to how they're going to reduce their commitment in the construction industry, which is great. And it's more organisations ought to do this and have a proper plan in place. But they know, because they're measuring what they do, they're measuring what their current problem is, and therefore they can say, well, if we do this, we can then reduce that. So they can see a clear way forward to reducing their carbon footprint. And that's what businesses need to be thinking about, and that's what the government needs to be thinking about. So if more and more people followed what private industry were doing, then we'd probably be in a better position.
I mean, I think I've said this on the podcast before, but I mean, I don't know how true it still is, but certainly, you know, in the last decade, as much as governments were saying anything, if at all, about anything environmental, like, and business gets a lot of the blame, but business were the people that were doing stuff, you know, they were like looking at it seriously and like, not all of them, but a lot of them were. There's a lot of greenwash and stuff as well, but there were a lot of businesses who were really like, how do we tackle this? And looked at it seriously and came up with some good ideas. And, I mean, even the BP, even the carbon footprint thing, that's something that came from BP.
Yeah.
So we've done the 4 effects ones, haven't we?
COVID, climate change, Brexit, social media.
So I'll do the last 2. I'm debating whether I want to get a coffee or not. Do you want another drink?
No, I'm fine.
Sure.
Water will be fine.
So I see these 2 questions as the kind of more fun questions.
Okay.
Um,
I thought we'd been having fun all the time anyway.
Well, Brexit and climate change and stuff can bring people down. But yeah, these 2. When you're self-employed, it's a little bit, because you can change things. But yeah, so I'll start us off with the change question. So this is another way of asking, because it's not a great question to ask people like, what do you hate about your job? You know, I did the what do you like, what do you hate? This is a much better way of asking that. It's like, it's a bit more positive framed. Doesn't involve the word hate. So if you could change any 3 things, stop stirring this and then talk. If you could change any 3 things about the way that you work or about your work or even the industry, what might you change? What would you change?
Oof. I think we mentioned it earlier. What I would change about my business and what I should change about my business is increasing my presence on social media. I think that would have a bigger impact on me and having probably more awareness of what I do. When I try and talk to people and say I operate in the standards industry, then that's like something going over somebody's head.
Like,
you know,
what's that? What
does it do?
Do you tell people what to do, or do you tell them not to do something?
So I think that's what I would like to change. Is
I mean,
that
do you sell it as consultants? Like, how do you pitch it to people?
It is. I classify myself as a business consultant, but over the years I've put my prices up because I think, well, there's no point in working with something.
Well.
It is, and it's been. I help businesses. I worked with one of my first clients. It was a friend of mine, and he said to me, "Oh, you do standards, don't you?" So I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, we need to get them for our business and our industry." So I said, "Fine." So I went along to see him, and the first part I do with any client is I sit down with them and I help them map their process, let them understand their processes. So I worked with him. I worked with a team in their office, and we went through a process mapping exercise. And when we'd finished, I ended up with a simple step-by-step process about his business. And what I do say to people at the end of that is, let me sell your business back to you. So I then go through the process. So this is what you do, that's what you do, this is what happens at that point, that's what you do. We got to the end of it, and he just looked at me and he said, "That is my business. That is absolutely fantastic." And he was so made up with this. He then printed a copy of this process, and any time anybody came into his office and they said, "What do you do?" and he just pointed to this colour chart on his wall and said, "That's what I do. This is my business." And he was so excited about it, because once you understand your process, once you understand your business, you can do so much more with it. If you understand what the steps are in that process, you can understand how to change it, what you can do to improve it, what you can do to change and make change for the better or for the worse. And if you understand that, you understand your business, then you'll understand how to make your life more worthwhile. So I help change lives. That's what I do by understanding process. And I'm just creating a new exercise now that I want to take out into the business world, but how making a cup of tea can change your world, or can change your business, can improve your business, because making a cup of tea is the same. It's a process.
Yeah, it's the one they use for Gantt charts, isn't it?
It is.
How to make a
How
cup
to
of
make
tea.
a cup of tea. But I want to take that into the business world and show people how simple making a cup of tea is. And so that's where I would take my improvements, is about then developing things that would make people more aware.
And it's also relevant to standards, because you wouldn't use unboiled water. You wouldn't pour it into the cup. Well,
Yeah.
you might pour it into the cup without the tea bag or whatever, depending on which way around you want to do it. But certain things need to happen, which is a standard.
It is,
for this.
If you want a consistent cup of tea, then you would follow this process. But
Yeah.
the key thing is now, how can you improve that process? So you've got your kettle, and so we fill the kettle with water, we turn it on, we boil it. While we're boiling it, we warm the pot. So there's lots of steps in that process. But now I've simplified my process. My son works for a instant hot water tap company, so he's made sure that I've got an instant hot water tap, so I don't need to wait for the kettle to boil. I just put my cup underneath the tap and turn it on.
Because a standard is already in place.
So I've just improved my process by 2.5 minutes.
Yeah.
So and then you think about, because you can actually do activity-based costing. Once you understand the process, you can then say, right, who does that part of the process, and how long does it take them? So, well, it takes somebody, they're on £15 an hour, and it takes them 3 minutes. So you divide £15 by 3 minutes, and you say, well, that's what it's costing me for that part of the process. Your managing director comes down and makes a cup of tea, and how much is it costing him to make that cup of tea? Because he's now on more than £15 an hour, and he's taking time out from what he should be doing. So you can then see, how can I improve that? Well, I'll get somebody else to make the tea for me. And so it's about then making sure you've got the right people in place at the right level that are doing the right things consistently, correctly. So process is just a wonderful thing. So and the more I can talk about that, I get on my little soapbox on standards, and I talk to people about standards and say, because I get excited about it. So what would I change about my business?
Have you done any systems theory?
Not really.
Have you
no.
come across systems theory? It was quite interesting. Have a look into it, dip your toe into it. But yeah, that's very much about what you're talking about, and it's like considering the whole process and that idea of a system is what it does, and you look at the output, and whatever it puts out, it's like that's what the system actually does.
Yes.
Not what it claims to do. It's like what it does is what it puts out. So you're looking at that whole process, and then what the output is, and then looking at all the feedback switches and stuff, and trying to consider, because every system's a system within a system. Like your nervous system is a system within the human body, which is a homeostatic kind of lump that you have to, all these systems have to keep working, and they're separate, but they also interact with each other. And like the idea of a leaf is a system on the branch, which is a system on the tree, which is a system within. Yeah,
they're all interconnected, and that's what process mapping is about. So it's about understanding that process and understanding how that fits in your business. But if you understand the process in your business, then the world is your lobster.
Yeah, well, you actually know what's going on and what you're doing, which
Absolutely.
a lot of businesses don't, do they?
They don't. And once they understand it, because I did work with a client some years ago when the dad was in the office upstairs. The office was palatial, it had glass windows overlooking the car park. Dad really wanted to retire, and son was sat downstairs. Imagine the scene where he's sat on a desk piled high with documents and computer in the middle. He's buried under this paperwork. So I said to them, let's go through the process mapping exercise, and Dad was adamant, my business is so complicated, nobody understands the business. So I said, well, just bear with me and let's go through this process. So we went through the process, and I sat down with a few of the team. We went through the process mapping exercise, and by the end of this, I've got the whole process mapped on a flip chart. I said, let me sell your business back to you. So I went through the process and I described each step to him. So this is what happens, this is what happens. And when we'd finished, he got quieter and quieter as we got to the end of it. He stood up, he shook my hand, he said, 40 years I've been in this business, I didn't realise how simple it was. He said, you've opened my eyes. Within 3 weeks, Dad had retired, son had moved into the office upstairs. That's what he wanted, but because he felt it was too complicated, he couldn't pass it on to his son. But once he understood the process and he understood how simple it was that he could then pass it on to his son and the business wouldn't fail, he was happy. So
That's a good story.
He dragged the caravan out and off he went on holiday.
Yeah.
And son took over the business. And that's what it is. It's about understanding. So if you can understand the process, you'll understand how to improve your
It's
life.
also that making people step back, step out of it as well.
Yes.
It's like you can't see it because you're too close to it. You know, you're confused. You can't see the wood for the trees. Come over here. Look at it from here. Look, it's that. Yeah. You've nailed it.
So I'm a process mapping consultant. That's what I do. So I help people understand their process. Standards are a byproduct of that. So if you want to make that product consistently, make your service consistent, then you could apply this.
Well, that's also kind of an audit of what you're already doing, isn't it? It's kind of like here's the standards, here are the criteria for the standards. What do you do as a business? Okay, well, you're already doing this to a degree, so do a bit more of that. That one you've got nailed. You're not doing any of this, so we need to put some of that in. So, yeah, there's an element of that to it.
There is.
Yeah. So is that 2 we've got?
That's what we got.
That's
to, yeah,
one.
so second, I think the second thing I'd probably change about is my marketing. So could I do more of the networking, and should I go out more and talk about this more? So probably the answer is yes. And the third thing I'd written down there was I should really talk to more people and try and get out to more people about what we've just discussed, because helping businesses and people understand their process, then I need to be able to show them what I can do and show them how I can help change their lives. But I'm not too keen about changing things. What I am doing is about improving things. So what would I do? And I think these things would improve my business. But would I change things? I love what I do, and I love talking about standards. I love helping people improve through standards, and that's what I do. So would I change much? No. I like what I do by having 6 holidays a year. That works for me. And as long as I can afford to pay for 6 holidays a year, then I'm happy and the wife's happy. So and the main thing is people well know that if you keep the wife happy, then happy wife is a happy life. That's all we say.
So let's go into the final question then. So UBI question. If there was a universal basic income, how might that change work for you? I mean, with some people, it's like it might change when they set up, or it might change things for their customers. You're working with business customers, like you've been in the industry for a while. I mean, could it potentially have helped you when you were setting up? Or was that like? I mean, the point to me from our discussion that I think it could have potentially been most helpful is when you were unemployed.
Yes.
And, you know, it probably would have been nice to not have to go to the job centre and deal with them until you got on your feet.
Yeah, I think that right now, universal basic income in my business, it's not really relevant.
It wouldn't really change anything for you.
It wouldn't, no. And the thing, I probably work less than a universal basic income because I put more hours into my clients than I've charged for, but they're getting value for money.
I suppose on your hourly rate, it would boost you up a bit.
Yeah.
You'd be above minimum wage.
It would be, yeah. So, and that's the whole thing about working for yourself. And I decide when to work, but I then think, well, yeah, actually this client needs this, so I'll do things outside what I've said I'm going to charge them. But most of my clients know that I'm there at the other end of the phone. I need this doing. I had a client the other day, just panicking about this. Don't worry, I'll sort it. So I did it for her, but no charge. So
I mean, so you're doing 3 days generally,
that's
or like
generally, that's what I try and work.
So I had a particular point that I was going with here, and then I've forgotten what it was. I can't remember. Sorry.
No, don't worry. But yeah, so universal basic income might be an improvement on what I'm getting already. But would I change anything about my business? I did say I'm not keen about change. What I'd say, as I'm getting older, I'm getting lazier. So change is not a good thing. But those were great questions. It always makes you think when people ask you questions about your job and your life, and it's just I think, yeah, I never thought of that. So I'm always interested to hear other viewpoints as well. So thanks for being a good host. Thank you.
No, it's been great to talk to you. My point on that, so I was going to ask, because we haven't really discussed sort of how you work. I don't get the impression that you're a workaholic, but I do get the impression that you will sort of answer clients out of hours, within reason, sort of thing. I'm sure you have a kind of like, I'm not going to answer you at 2 o'clock in the morning, what are you doing?
Yeah, I've always had the...
But do you like, I mean, are you very good at, because you've always had a kind of, I mean, obviously years on the road and being in hotels and stuff, your working hours are kind of, have always been a bit stretchy.
They have.
But I get the impression you like to work sort of regular hours, not too much, and you don't want it to bleed into too much of your life. It's like there is a good separation of work and life.
I think it's one thing I would always give people who want to be self-employed. And the advice I would give is that you need to be disciplined. So what you need to do is, when you start to look at your diary, is always put your free time in first, the time for you. So you book that in blocks in your diary. So you'd say, well, I need to go to this, whatever it is, you're in a club or something like that. So put the 2-3 hours that you go to that club in the diary first, before you put any appointments in your diary. I've always been of the discipline. I've worked from home for probably the last 25, 30 years anyway. So working from home, I don't do the domestic chores. I don't wash the clothes, hang the washing out. I don't do the dishwashing. So when the wife used to get home from work, then there was a pile of pots in the sink. Then I'll come back up at 6 o'clock and do those, but I'm not doing it during the day because she didn't do it when she was at work.
Yeah.
You wouldn't do it if you were at work. You wouldn't rush and do the pots.
That's a really, really good point. It's kind of the flip side of, I've talked about, so someone was saying how when you're in charge of a business, book in a time when you're not open, when other employees aren't in, to do all the stuff you're supposed to be doing, the strategy, the executive stuff, because the rest of the day you'll be firefighting and you won't get a chance to do it. And that's kind of the flip side. And I have experience of that, of like being sort of working from home with a partner kind of coming home, and there is that expectation of, well, you've been at home all day. It's like, yeah, but I've also been working. I've been working at home, but there's this sort of, it's changed now post-COVID, but it was like, you're working at home, you're not doing anything. So you can do all that. You're in the house, therefore you're not doing anything.
That's the perception, and it's always been a discipline that I don't do that. I don't do the domestic stuff between, I get up, and what I've always done is I get dressed up. I don't
put on
slouch
the suit
around. But I'll have a
You get
smart,
into the mode,
I do. So I have a smart shirt on. When I'm online, I'll put a tie on as well. So I've always been of that discipline. I don't switch the phone on, my mobile switched on, but it's always on silent. So I've done that for the last 10 years. So if a call comes in, if it's family and I look down and it's family, I'll then return the call as soon as I can. If it's family and I see it, I'll answer it. Anybody else, they can wait. I'm in a meeting with you right now. I've just had 3 missed calls. No idea who they're from. Not bothered. My important is the person who's opposite me. So that's and people don't get into that. I'll go on social media and I'll do this. No.
I think that's going to come back. I think that because you can't operate like that, and you don't know who's a serious person either.
Switch the phone off after 6 o'clock or at weekends, and that's it. I've always said I don't work weekends. So it's Monday to Friday. I'll work weekends if I want to. That's the thing. So I need to do that for a client. I've got to do some work for a client. Yesterday it came in. I've got to do that this afternoon, but it will be probably tonight by the time I get round to doing this. but I know then I'll take some time off later on in the week. It's leisure time. So, but I'll do that, and I'll then just allow for that time. But then a few weeks ago, and I do say to the wife, if you want to go somewhere, if you want to do something, put it in my diary. If she wants some leisure time, wants me to come with her, it's in the diary. So the diary is like, it's the key thing to me. Put it in the diary. If it's in the diary, it gets done.
Do you have a proper paper diary still?
Physical person with the diary. I then copy that into my phone so I can then...
Yeah.
Because I've got a
But then if
terrible
you lose
memory.
your phone, at least you've got,
I've got a paper copy,
where you're supposed to be.
And I always say, if it's in pen, it gets done. So if I know, if somebody says, I might be able to do this, I'll put it in pencil. We confirm it, goes in pen. So it's all written in pen. Once it's in pen, that's it, gets done. Because I've got a terrible memory, so I don't write it down.
But it works, doesn't it? That's the thing. If it works, it's like, it's all well and good having these fancy bells and whistles, but if
I call it
lose your phone or you run out of power, it's over.
Yeah, I call it the manual digital method. That's what I use, and so, and then it's the pen. So I buy a new diary every year, and it gets written in. So that everything is written in. But the main thing is, I plan, and I plan the leisure time. So that's my diary. The green is the holidays. So they're already planned in for this year, and 2025. They're already planned in for next year. So it's a case of plan your leisure time. But I used to say I visit a club. My club is a group called Toastmasters International, where they help people speak professionally, but it's a hobby. It's about speaking more confidently in front of an audience, and there's clubs all over the world. And I've been a member of Toastmasters for 21 years now. But I always put Toastmasters in my diary because it's my learning time, it's my development time. And people say, I haven't got time. Yeah, but have you got time to develop yourself?
Yeah, you've got time for the things that
are
important.
And it's the same with when I was in the finance industry. I then started to teach people how to sell life assurance. But we used to sit down as a sales team. But I always used to say, book in the time for the telephone calls. So Thursday morning is a great time to ring people. Thursday afternoon is a good time to ring people. You'll get people in during the day. And Thursday night, so book in these hourly slots that you're going to spend. I'm going to make 10, 15, 20 phone calls, but put that time in and mark it down. That's when I'm going to ring people. This is when I'm going to hold appointments and then give people those appointments. That's when I'll see people. But we had a guy in our office who vowed, when he joined the industry, he would never work at night. He said, you don't visit your solicitor at night. Why visit your financial advisor at night? He said, if they want to see me, they'll come in the office. And that was it. He worked 9 to 5 in the office and he made £1 million. So you can't really complain about that. You know? It worked for him. He was disciplined, and that's what it should be. If you want the life, but self-employment is a great life. And I would recommend it to everybody, but not everybody has the discipline or has the want to do that. But if you are working for an employer, make sure it's what you want. Is it your passion? Are you passionate about what you're doing with that employer? If you're not, leave. Because if you're not passionate about what you sell, what you do, what you manufacture...
I mean, I'm 100% with you on that, but when I started working, I was never interested in work. I always wanted to do film, because that was the area I wanted to work in. So I took jobs as I'll just take a job, to pay for what I need and so on, you know, because that's what you do. And yeah, post 2008, it was always very easy to walk into a job and kind of do anything. And then post 2008, that very much changed. And I foolishly, because I jumped around, I didn't get any, there was no progression, you know. The money would kind of go up through inflation, but they were all kind of entry-level jobs and stuff. But I was always it doesn't matter. And I don't think it's just age, but it has changed. It's you can't just get any... You can still go out there and get work. I can get work. But it is harder than it used to be. And there are less jobs and a lot of the pay's rubbish. So I think it's a scarier market now, especially if you're starting out. But I think just take anything for a bit, get the experience, and then look while you're in work is the other thing, isn't it? If but just because you're in an awful role, you can stay there for a bit with a plan.
Yes.
Yeah, you don't have to do, because my tendency was always like, screw this job, I'm out. Just walk out. Because you knew you could just get another job. And we don't work in that kind of job market anymore. You can't, you want to leave with some kind of reference or not burn the bridges or, That's a definite change for me.
One of the jobs I worked in many years ago was in the printing industry, and I went to work. It was one sort of school before going off to real world in the work, and I got this job in the printing industry. And my job was to operate a graining machine, which was you put a piece of paper through 2 rollers, and it raises the profile on the paper. So you'd get an A0 piece of paper at one side, a stack of paper, and you'd pick it up with 2 fingers and put it through the machine. And that was it. So literally you were spending hours putting a piece of paper into a roller, and the other side somebody was collecting it and counting it. And so all you did was you collected and counted. The worst part about that job was that when you were putting the paper in, directly opposite this machine was the clocking on clock that moved every minute. And so all you saw was this clock moving every minute. So when you think about boredom and working in a job, then I've been there. I've done those jobs when there's manual labour involved. And the machine needs to change its roller. Oh, thank goodness for that. You could do something different, but that was very few and far between. But the job of putting this piece of paper in was the most soul-destroying job I ever had. But you can't give up. This job needs to be finished. We've got a job target to get. I've got to get through all these reams of paper and put them on this pallet to be collected by a client at a certain time. So you've just got to, you get in the job, you do the job, you learn the discipline, but you also learn patience. So these have a learning experience for you, but you also then learn, I'm never going to do that again. But it's just about, you'll get the job and you'll do the job for a period of time while you have a plan. But you were able to think about, right, what's my plan to get out of this as you put in the piece of paper.
But there's not even that, there doesn't seem to be even that attitude anymore that, all of it, has a learning value. It seems to be that there's a lot of roles within work now where people are just like, oh no, that's a crap job. Someone should do that. Someone has to do it, it's crap. But there's no, everything's kind of being devalued. It's no, there's value in that because you're learning something, you're learning these skills, these transferable skills or whatever, and it's amount of time. And also, you're in the business. You're connected to other things that are happening. You know certain things about the environment, the literal company of people. That's useful. You can trade that into other skills, into other roles and things like that. You're learning about the business and how it works and who works there and who's important and who to kind of influence and stuff. But yeah, we've lost that, the kind of value all work.
Well, every job is important because it has a place in society.
It's been created for a reason.
Yeah.
We need somebody to do this thing or these things.
And then sometimes you might have to do that job because of circumstances, and you think, well, I'll do it for a short period of time. But don't devalue yourself when you're in that job, and don't let others devalue yourself either, devalue you, because it's about, this job is important. If you've ever read, it's a book called The Marriott Way, and it's about the ethos of Marriott, and they value every employee, quite rightly. Every organisation should, but you need to read The Marriott Way to understand that everybody, from the cleaner, from the kitchen porter, is a part of the Marriott values and the Marriott chain. And what they do is they give everybody the opportunity to stay overnight in a Marriott hotel. And what they say is you need to experience what we deliver and what everybody else is doing. So everybody comes in, doesn't matter what level they're at, everybody stays overnight in a Marriott hotel. Because that means you then learn and see what other people are doing and what they're providing, what service they're providing, and that you are part of that service. You know, the chambermaid is probably the most important, but there's no most important, but she is important. And so she's delivering. This chambermaid who's interviewed in this particular book shows that the value, that the way that she folds the sheets, folds the towels, puts the pillowcase on, it's all got a process, but it's all valuable because the client sees that, and the client walks in and goes, oh wow, that's the Marriott way. And it's what everybody should aspire to, is about, just think about your own life, your own job. Can I do it to the best of my ability? And when I've finished, when I go out, and it's typed on your tombstone, you did all right.
Thank you again to Phil for being my guest. Thanks as always to all my guests, and thanks to you, Leeds, for being my subject. To work with Phil, go to www.philheath.com. If you'd like to speak to me about one or any of my guests or their interviews or what the hell I'm on about at any particular moment, or even about being a guest yourself, then yes, you can do that. I shouldn't have to find all 1,000 guests myself. This is supposed to find some of its own guests to some extent. So, if you'd like to get in touch with the show, you can email working hours at workinghourspod@western-studios.com. What is Western Studios? Well, if you'd like to make a podcast series, don't forget you can do that and support Working Hours by buying podcast services from me, a podcaster, here in Leeds, Western Studios Leeds. To do that, email makemypodcast@western-studios.com. The website and social links for Western Studios are in the credits of the show. I do already make a few shows for other people, but it would be good to pick up a few more. Remember, listener, no matter what you do, it's impossible for you to understand anything that your salary depends on you not understanding. Okay, that's me. Work for peace and plan with kindness. Cheers, ears. Take care out there and be kind to each other, Leeds. Working Hours is produced, recorded, edited and published by Simon Treen for Western Studios, Leeds Limited. The music was The Bees from Chopin's Etudes, which is in the public domain and was taken from museopen.org. Go to western-studios.com and use the contact page on the site to drop me a message about either Working Hours or about your own Leeds podcast project. Keep up to date with Working Hours and find out about the other great Leeds podcasts that Western Studios is involved with by following Western Studios Leeds on Facebook at facebook.com/western_studios_Leeds and on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/company/western-studios. Western Studios Leeds is available to loaners to help them realise their own podcast projects for only £30 for an hour of audio podcast work or £40 for an hour of video podcast work. Email makemypodcast@western-studios.com with details of your project and what support you want to get your Leeds podcast made. Whatever your podcast question or need, get in touch with Western Studios Leeds.